Hello everybody, this is Graeme Anderson, and today I'm going to be looking at Cooper Island. Now, I've been looking forward to this game since I first learned about it from Essen 2019 previews. The theme of exploring a peninsula and building up your landscape to get better and better resources really intrigued me. And when I finally saw this in the store and I read the back of the box, and where it says, Cooper Island is the epitome of an expert game. In it, you'll explore not just an island, but also rich strategies and subtle mechanisms. An intricate clockwork that invites deep thought thanks to its strategic demands and clever use of landscape tile. Well, that kind of sounded like a challenge to me, so I knew I had to get this one to the table. So, was it something I enjoyed? Let's get to the table, see how it's played, and then come back for my final thoughts on Cooper Island. So here's Cooper Island set up for 3 players. I will not be going through all the rules in detail, but did want to give you an idea of how the game plays, and unfortunately this will still be a long walkthrough. The board is set up so that each player has a peninsula in front of them that is connected to the central action board. Since we have 3 players, it can look like this. Then there is a bay tile put in between each peninsula. Next, lay out the 5 cargo ships, which is also the game round tracker, and place the Harbour Master on card 1. Each player takes a player board, a worker board, and all the matching components. Place your 5 crate lids on the 5 cargo ship cards, then put the buildings on their spots on the player board. Small, large, and fortress. Your cartographer points will start at either 3 or 4 depending on who is first player. 2 of your normal workers go into the available worker slot, and the other 2 along with the special workers go into the reserve slots. Place your milestone markers in their spaces face up. On your peninsula, place your 5 ruin markers on the indicated spaces, and both of your ships go into the bay area. You'll place your 5 income ships to the left of your player board, and you'll receive your 6 islet tiles with your color on the back. Next, lay out the Royal Order cards, which will be the goals to accomplish during the game to get end of game scoring points. And this is going to be based on player count. So for 3 players, we have 6 random cards. Shuffle the small and large building piles separately, and all the double landscape tiles are placed in a bag, and each player will draw 2 to start. Make a bank with the single landscape tiles, coins, resources, anchor tokens, and logbooks, and the logbook should be kept face down. Each player will then take a single metal tile and place it on the start space of their peninsula along with 1 food token. Each player receives 1 coin which will go into their storage, and the starting player gets the Cooper first player marker. You are now ready to start. Now during the game you will be mainly exploring your peninsula by placing landscape tiles onto it. If the area is unexplored, that is no landscape tiles are on it, and it's empty, so no ruins, then you can place a landscape tile on it. You can also place a landscape tile on top of another landscape tile, as long as the tiles underneath match the terrain type of both of the hexes of the new tile, and the existing tiles are empty. That is, no resource cubes, no buildings, nor statues. Whenever you place a landscape tile, you will always place a resource cube on the new hex. You will never have more than 1 cube on each tile, and the height of the landscape tiles represents the value or quantity of that resource cube. That means that a cube that is on top of a 1 landscape tile represents 1 of that resource. If the stack of tiles underneath the resource cube is a height of 3 tiles, then the resource cube represents 3 of that resource. Collecting these resources will allow you to build income boats to activate during the income phase. You can erect buildings with the resources, build statues, or supply cargo ships. And by doing these things, you'll receive helm points, which will allow you to move your ships around your peninsula and maybe even into other people's peninsulas. So let's talk about the gameplay. The game is played over 5 rounds, as marked by the movement of the Harbour Master, who will advance 1 ship per round. A round is made up of the income phase, the worker phase, and the cleanup phase. During the income phase, you'll action all of the income actions that you have. There are 2 pre-printed on your board, and you can get more by building those income boats. The 2 printed on your board are place 1 islet tile and performance action, and the other printed one is to place a double landscape tile. The place 1 islet action allows you to place one of your islet tiles that are 1 landscape tile and 1 water tile. When placing, you have to follow the following rules. The landscape side must be on an unexplored space which is adjacent to at least 1 other landscape space and not occupied by a ruin. The water side must be placed on the sandbar so that it covers only half of the sandbar. You cannot add it if it will completely cover the sandbar because the other half is already covered by another tile. Your first islet must be placed on the right hand side of your starting space, but subsequent rounds they can be placed on either side. Once the islet tile is placed, place 1 resource cube on the landscape side and perform the islet action on the other half of the tile. The second income action is to place a double landscape tile. Take 1 of the landscape tiles from your reserve and place it onto the board. Now you have 3 options for placing. Option 1 is placing the tile in an unexplored space. with at least one hex of the new landscape tile must be adjacent to an existing landscape tile, and the new tile cannot be placed on top of an existing ruin. Option 2 is putting the new tile on top of existing tiles. Both of the existing landscape spaces must be of the same height, but if there's a difference of 1, you can spend one of your cartographer points to add a single tile to one side, and I'll talk more about that during the anytime actions. Each of the existing landscape spaces must match the landscape placed on top of it, with the exception of a settlement. Settlements can be placed on any landscape type. And finally, the existing landscape must not be occupied by anything like a resource cube or a building. Option 3 is to place the landscape tile where one side is over an existing landscape space and the other side is unexplored. You must spend a cartographer point to add a single matching terrain tile underneath the unexplored side. Then the previous placement rules apply. Finally, after the tile has been placed, place a resource cube matching the terrain type on both sides of the new terrain tile. So now on to Phase 2, the worker placement phase. Each player starts with 2 standard workers available, and in turn order take one of your available workers and place it on an action. If it is a round worker, it must be placed on a round action space. If it's a square worker, which you'll get later on, it must be placed on a square action space. You can place your worker on any free spot for free, but if there's already a worker there, or stack of workers, you must pay a resource to the player whose marker is directly below yours. So it doesn't matter how many players have already used this spot, you will only ever play one resource. If you already have placed a worker there this round, you cannot add a second one. The resource you pay to the other player go into their marketplace, not their storage. If you cannot or do not want to pay the other player, you must place an anchor underneath one of your ships. The next time you try and move the ship, you must first spend helm points to get rid of the anchors. Some action spots will grant you an extra ability, but only the first player to cover it up. Subsequent players will not receive that bonus. I'm going to go through the actions fairly quickly and group them into similar actions. So Section A allows you to either draw one landscape tile from the bag or place a landscape tile from your reserve, and then you'll get one cartographer point. Section C allows you to draw one landscape tile from the bag and place one landscape tile from your reserve. Section E gives you 3 cartographer points and either a coin or a resource cube of your choice to place in your storage. Section G allows you to either draw 2 landscape tiles from the bag or place 2 landscape tiles from your reserve. Now, anytime you're allowed to place a tile through any of these actions, you must follow the normal placement rules that I laid out during the income phase. The next sections deal with paying cost to get something. So let's have a quick talk about resource cubes. Any cube that is on a landscape tile represents one or more resources based on the height of the landscape tiles. Any resource cube in your storage always represents one of that resource. So even if you moved a cube from a landscape tile that was 4 high and therefore the cube was a value of 4, as soon as it goes into your storage, it is now a 1 value resource cube. When you pay for any item, you can use any combination of resource cubes from your storage and your landscape tiles, but not your marketplace. Just remember that the landscape tile resource cubes may count as many resources and you do not get change. So, Section B allows you to build an income boat. Pay the topmost empty spot on your player board and take a boat of your choice, and you can immediately perform that income. Section D allows you to erect a building, either small, large, or a fortress. Pay the cost as outlined on your player board, then you must place the building from your player board on the highest cultivated landscape tile that is empty. When it's a small building, you're going to draw 3 small building cards and keep 1. If it's a large building, you draw 4 large building cards and keep 1. Building a building gets you helm points, and I'll talk about those in a bit. Section F allows you to either remove a ruin from your peninsula as long as you have room on your player board, and you must flip it over to its statue side. Or you can place a statue back onto the board by taking it from your player board, and just like buildings, it must be placed in your highest empty landscape tile. Section H allows you to supply 1 cargo ship. Choose one of the ships you haven't already supplied and pay the resources across the top of the cargo ship card, and then take your crate lid from the cargo ship card. If the harbor master is on the ship you supply, you get a discount if you're the first person to do so that round. Lids can be used for anytime actions, which will be explained later. So that is all the action spaces. Now let's talk about helm points. Whenever you receive helm points, you'll spend them on one ship. You cannot split them between ships. First, if there are any anchors on your ship, you must spend 1 helm point per anchor to remove them. When your ship moves, it moves 1 space at a time and jumps over any islet for 1 helm point. Every time you jump over anybody's islet, you can perform the action of the islet. If you reach or pass a bay water space, draw 1 logbook and take the action shown on the other side and keep it for end of game scoring. If you reach or pass another player's harbor, you will also get a logbook, but you must pay the owner of the harbor 1 coin or resource, which will go into their marketplace, not in their storage. If you cannot or do not want to pay that other player, you must take an anchor and place it under one of your ships. Those are the main actions you can take. Now let's quickly look at the anytime actions and cartographer actions. For anytime actions, you can move any resources from your landscape tiles or your marketplace into your storage. There are also 3 market trade anytime actions you can choose, and the conversions are shown on your player board. An important note about marketplace and storage: whenever you get a resource from another player, it goes into your marketplace. And whenever you convert goods from your storage or landscape tiles using the market trade actions, the results also go into your marketplace. Any coins or resources in your marketplace cannot be used for anything. They are dead stock, and at the end of the round they will be returned to the supply if they're still in your marketplace. But you can always use the anytime action to move your resources from your marketplace into your storage. The last anytime action is using your crate lids that you have acquired using the supply cargo ship action or using one of your large building cards. Now you can move your crate lid onto one of the action spaces located next to the marketplace, and once placed, the lid will stay there unless you pay for its removal during the cleanup phase, and the same thing with the large building cards. Once you've used it, you must pay to flip it back over. The cartographer actions allow you to spend cartographer points to alter the landscape of your peninsula. When you are placing a double landscape tile and there's a difference of 1 level, you can spend 1 cartographer point to add an extra single tile to the lower side. For 2 cartographer points, you can add a single landscape tile to an unexplored space adjacent to any landscape tile. For 3 cartographer points, you can add a single landscape tile to a landscape tile that already exists, as long as it is level 3 or lower, and it must match the type. And for 4 cartographer points, it's the same thing as 3, but you have to pay that if the level is 4 or higher. One last rule before we get to cleanup is how you get more workers. You have 4 milestone workers. When you achieve one of the milestones, you can flip it over and either get 2 helm points or get an extra worker. If you pick a regular worker, move it into the available worker section. If you choose to get a special worker, you can move one of your available regular workers to one of the Royal Order cards. This will allow you to score that card at the end of the game. If you do not have a worker on a Royal Order card, you will not score any points for it. So finally we get to the cleanup phase. First, you need to feed your workers. On your board, it will show you how much food you need to return. For every food you cannot pay, receive an anchor. Next, you can reactivate your assets. It will cost 1 coin to remove a crate lid from an action space to make it available again, and it costs 2 coins to reactivate a large building, and you can only reactivate 1 asset per round. Next, you gain helm points equal to the number of statues you have erected on your peninsula. If the top 3 spaces of your peninsula are covered, gain 3 helm points. Next, return your workers from the central board to your available worker section. Anything left in your market space is now returned to the general supply, and finally move the Harbour Master to the next ship. When the Harbour Master moves off the last ship, the game is over. At the end of the game, the final scoring will happen. Each logbook will get you 5 points, then gain 1 point per space past the closest harbour or bay behind your ship. So basically you get 1 point per space you moved, and a logbook is just an easy way to remember that you've moved at least 5 spaces. Next, for any Royal Order cards you have a worker on, gain those points. You must have reached the first stage of the card and have a worker on the card to gain any points from it. Certain buildings will get you points if you fulfilled conditions, and then you get 1 point for every resources left. Resources include resources in your personal storage, cartographer points, and any double landscape tiles you have left in reserve. Ones in your marketplace or on the landscape tiles do not count. Finally, you'll lose a point for each anchor still under your ship, and the player with the most points is the winner. So let's get back to see what I thought about Cooper Island.
So let's talk about theme and components of Cooper Island. The theme for this game, you know what, at a high level, is a fun idea. Exploring a new peninsula and sailing your boat around to discover other areas. But that's kind of where this theme stops. The mechanisms and what you do make very little thematic sense. I mean, why do the resources lose value between the location tiles and your storage? Reasons. Why do you perform actions when you go over an islet? Reasons. There's just so much in this game that is not tied to the theme that it just makes learning and teaching a little bit harder than it should be, as sometimes it just doesn't seem to make any thematic sense, which makes it harder to connect the different aspects of the game together. So let's talk about the components then. Now, as you saw from the overview, there's a fair number of components in the game, and they all seem to be of decent quality. Now, I had an issue, and this is probably just me, with my cardboard, in which just about every sheet had an area which is really not cut through well. So a lot of my components have ragged edges, but I'm assuming that's my copy, and you know what? It didn't affect the gameplay whatsoever. I really like the way the main board and the peninsulas fit together. I mean, for a 2-player game, you can arrange the peninsulas to either be opposite each other or more like an L shape. It's something little, but I enjoyed that. So I was happy with the components themselves, but I didn't think they were fantastic, but definitely usable. Now I must mention the player boards though. The game really needs better player aids. Yes, the player and worker boards are supposed to be player aids, but they're a bit overwhelming when you first look at them. When you understand the options you have and how the game works, they're good for that. But that first time you're learning, boy, those are almost a detriment to learning. Now on to the gameplay. Now I'll tell you honestly, when I first played this game, I really didn't like it. When we got to the scoring, and I achieved almost nothing, well at least I felt, but I still won the game with like 17 points, I really didn't feel like I had grasped the game at all. Some of the other players around the table actually said they hated the game. But after the game day was finished, and I find myself going back thinking, what could I have done differently and how could I have achieved more? And honestly, when I talked to my wife, she said the same thing, that she wanted to try it again because she was thinking exactly the same thing. Some people are really going to like that, and unfortunately some of the other players I played with definitely didn't like that. For me, I found myself getting the game back to the table again and again because I wanted to try something else. Or I realized that maybe what I did last game was maybe not the optimal path. And I thought about it and maybe thought through another way to approach it. I mean, you want to build buildings? You can get a small building out in the first round, maybe even a large building. If you want to go heavy on statues, you need to be looking ahead at the entire rest of the game to figure out what you need to be doing when. And it's an entire game goal, not just one turn goal. Now, there were a lot of aspects I really enjoyed of this game. Getting those buildings built and deciding which building based on the cards drawn, I felt was really interesting because all the cards I draw seem to be good. I can see a use for all of them, but I need to be picking the one that really fits best with my strategy. The large buildings as well, especially when they have a really good power, and usually worth victory points if you can meet their conditions and they're not flipped over at the end of the game. The statues that give you help points every round are extremely useful to get early on, as getting one early means using of your islets and getting those logbooks and moving your ships. And moving your ships is worth a fair number of points. That's where I seem to get a good chunk of my points. And that's what this game is for me. It really comes down to each turn thinking through decisions on how to achieve your goals. When you get that first extra worker, you take a round worker so that gives you more actions to take in a round, or you go for a square worker so you can place one of your workers on the end of game scoring card. Now this game lasts between, I'd say, an hour and a half and 2.5 hours, but you're really only taking 10, maybe 13 actions over 5 rounds. I found the people that tended to have their heads down at the start of each round, figuring out what they wanted to do. But honestly, once that initial thought period was over each round, the round itself went reasonably quickly. But be prepared for some time just spent looking at your board, looking at your resource, looking at your landscape tiles, and trying to figure out in your head the best way to use them this round. Now, one of my negatives for this game, and I think this may be a combination of the rules and the theme, are the number of little gotcha rules that there seems to be in this game. And by gotcha rules, I mean that they're little rules that are very important, but since they don't really feel thematic, are easy to overlook. You want to do a market trade. You take the resources off your landscape tiles or your storage, but the results go into your marketplace, and you need to move it back to your storage before the end of the round, or it's gone. Why? Rules. When someone uses your harbor, they give you a resource that goes into your marketplace, and they can take it from anywhere. Why? Why shouldn't it go from the storage on their boat to your storage? Why from anywhere to your marketplace? Rules. Now, I think this game is going to be very divisive, as it was for the people I played it with. Some of them were really put off by their first play. But some of us just wanted to play it again to see if we can do better the next time, and then again. And everyone that I played with multiple times has always done better the second and third game we played. Now, it has plateaued, but there's definitely a sense of accomplishment in the subsequent plays. Now, I have played this designer's other games, like La Granja and Solaris Mission. Now, Cooper Island is much more like Solaris Mission. In Solaris Mission, the first play, you're just trying to figure out how the game works. But I grew, the more I played, to like Solaris Mission, and the same is true for Cooper Island. But it's a fairly, not punishing, but you need to have a plan turn one and always be working towards that plan or goal. So, when you get right down to it, the things I enjoyed is working out that puzzle that the game has laid out before me, figuring out what I want to achieve, then working to achieve that goal. Now, the rules sometimes got in the way of playing the game, and that could be seen as a negative, but the more I played, the more that went away from me. It was more like learning the limits of the environment that you're playing in. So, would I recommend this game? Now, I ended up really enjoying this game, but I have described this game to other people like being in a small box with very little room to move, and you're trying to find a way out. It can be done, and there's a definite feeling of satisfaction when you do, but it might not be obvious the first time you play. Now, if that sounds interesting to you, I would say I would highly recommend this game to you. But there's no way I can give this game a blanket recommendation to everyone. But I would say, don't judge this game solely on one play. It is definitely a more complex game, so I would say you should try this game, if not once, hopefully twice, before you make up your mind. But that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.
Thanks so much for watching another Dice Tower video. If you enjoy our videos, subscribe to the channel for more fun, comprehensive board game coverage. Also, consider joining us at one of our events. Come to Dice Tower Retreat, a small, intimate gathering where gaming is king. Join us for Dice Tower Cruise, the largest board game cruise. Attend Dice Tower West in Las Vegas for gaming fun on the West Coast, or Dice Tower East in Orlando, in sunny Florida. Dice Tower Conventions, the friendliest gaming conventions on Earth. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.